Well, I became an architect, I suppose, because I wasn't a good enough artist. My father was an artist, my mother and brother were artists, my cousins, or most of them, were artists of various sorts. I was considered I was supposed to be the more practical one, and anyway, I just grew up expecting to be an architect. If anybody could tell me another way this building could have been designed, I'd be very interested.
In the 50s and 60s, there weren't many celebrities, I don't think, but he was one. He would be the best-known architect in Australia, I think. He also had an international dimension.
Oh yes, he was absolutely fantastic as a teacher and a lecturer. He was incisive, he was always prepared, he just would open up your mind to a completely different aspect of looking at things.
His skills as a commentator was to explain how architecture reflects ourselves, our culture, our situation, our history and our values.
I think Robin, growing up without a father, his father dying when he was 4, he grew up very much influenced by his very strong-willed mother. I think he got that zeal from Edith. The fact that she wrote radio plays, for example, means that she was wanting to put her ideas out.
Everything that was in our lives always had to be the best. Not necessarily monetary-wise, but good. I mean, the food was good, the wines were good, everything was good. Like the holidays were good. I mean, little things like we'd go picnics. The food was always good for picnics. We'd go to the drive-in. But we'd take our own food. So we'd have beautiful chicken sandwiches or egg sandwiches that Mum had made. So we'd all pile into Studebaker and there'd be a container of sandwiches would suddenly appear. So he didn't involve himself with having to go into those sort of areas where you just buy your chips.
From this extraordinary family, painters, sculptors, watercolourists, people who can write, like his uncle, Martin. Interestingly, Boyd's the only architect, and that's a different relationship. That's a professional relationship with the real world. I think before World War II, the public had an ambivalent relationship to the idea of the architect. For most people, architects were reserved for the so-called better suburbs and the better classes, and it was essentially an elite profession for an elite class of Australian life. And there wasn't necessarily an idea that good design was available to every man.
This is a villa where the average Mr. and Mrs. Australian and their 2.5 children live. The Australian suburban villa is unquestionably good, even a social triumph of goodness. But let's not for a minute confuse it with products of conscious, educated design. Let's not confuse it with art or with architecture, which is the subject of another program.
I first met Robin Boyd the night his daughter Mandy was born in late 42. A man bumped into me and apologised. I was sorry, I'm a bit drunk. I just had a baby. I'm a father. That's how I met Robin Boyd. Small Home Service was set up to bring architect-designed houses to people who couldn't afford the services of an architect, and it worked for many, many years. It was unique in the world.
The Small Home Service was perfect. It meant that he could write a weekly article in the Age newspaper, and this was an article that had 3 parts. An article about perhaps furnishings in the house, an article about the house that was featured each week, and then there was the drawing. So you had drawing, house description, and a general thematic article. And you could buy house plans and specifications for just £5. And so if you did that between 1947 and 1953, every week you're reaching every Victorian, and Robin very quickly became a household name. What you see here is a clarity of structure. There's the extraordinary floating joinery unit which houses the TV and the stereo. And there's also, in terms of materiality, a sense of the use of natural browns and ochres, and then moments, which I love, of gold.
Robin and Patricia were married in late 1941. The house was beautifully neat, and yet at night, there they were in the corner. And this space, the sitting room, was over there the bed. When the guests had gone, this was the bedroom. Nobody else ever did that, as far as I know.
Robin used the house in a way, as most architects do their own house, as a sort of a display home of what he is capable of doing when he doesn't have the constraints of clients that are overly cautious. And I think it was a pure demonstration of his way of thinking imaginatively about every issue there is to think about to start with. How do you arrange a house on that rather small site? How do you ensure privacy for your family? How do you get a feeling of spaciousness?
The interesting thing about this house, a lot of people notice, but we all do it now, was the isolation of the children, which said a lot for the boys. They're such a devoted couple, so in love all their lives. And the children were sort of at a remove.
Typical evening when they were entertaining, we'd have dinner early, go down to the other end, which is where the TV was too, so we'd watch TV or do homework. Over the other side of the courtyard, all these people, and they were often roariously funny, so you'd hear all this laughter and things happening. I got to meet some quite interesting people through those encounters.
The dinners we would have food was absolutely secondary. I wouldn't say the wine was secondary. The wine was primary, but the food was secondary. But what was absolutely primary was the conversation, the debate about Australia, not just about architecture, about everything. Robin was a social commentator, and he saw our buildings and our cities as an integral part of the whole, forming the social aspects of life.
The boys had interesting friends and people in media and academia, and conversation was pretty good, and always, of course, on the left of politics.
At the same time, he and Patricia loved the finer things in life. They were a striking couple. They dressed immaculately. They drove very beautiful, expensive cars. And at the same time, Robin was concerned about lampposts in the streets, and he would design project houses that people out at Narre Warren might buy so that our suburbs might be a better place. Robin knew how to turn the knife, I think, to make us think harder about what we were doing. I think to jolt us out of our complacency. To call the book The Australian Ugliness, I think, was a very shrewd move. If you'd called the book The Australian Beauty, I don't think it would have sold. I think he knew that we needed not to be hurt, but to be castigated for things that we could do better.
Well, the trouble seems to be not bad taste, but a lack of taste. Popular Australian taste in interior design is not the taste of people who have studied the good and the bad and weighed up a decision in favour of the latter. It is unawakened taste. It is a taste that has never been aware of good.
A group of people who had houses in Merimbula contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in taking part in an exercise to build a motel. He was terrific to work with. He made decisions very quickly. He had to, because he was doing so many other things. You know, he was a prolific writer all the time that this was going on, and was a fantastic design. It was almost too fantastic a design because in its day it was so challenging to everyone who had never seen anything like this before.
It's a place that I both stayed in as a child, maybe once or twice, and then it's something that I returned to as an architect when I had professional experience. And I think it's how those two play off that's probably intriguing for me now. It's the telegraph posts, the untreated timber, the face brickwork, so that directness of materials is important in the work that we do now.
I think Australia continues to be ugly. Robin Boyd would have been able to stamp his foot still. The periphery of our cities is still barren and ugly. In a wealthier suburbs where there's a sort of rash of the sort of Tuscan palazzo and the neoclassical fetish is still there, I think he would shudder at the excess and the vulgarity of some of the excess.
Think how ridiculous it is that some people still, this very day, are building imitations of 19th century buildings, colonial houses, Georgian blocks of flats.
His career, he was such a star. When the partnership was formed, it was such a stellar arrangement, 3 stars. They were getting the good jobs, and of course they got the huge job. Then it all went wrong.
I think Robin Boyd's practice as it moved into the 60s changed. There was the loss of the National Gallery of Victoria Commission and Grounds setting up his own practice, and that would have been a big loss to a firm which was on the up. Grounds Romberg and Boyd, or Grom Boyd, was really about to, I think, fire on all cylinders. But it must have been extraordinarily debilitating not to have the work come in to sustain the practice.
Melbourne, 1971. Dear Missy, things are sinking fast at this end. That is, no new jobs, no old ones likely to bring in money in the foreseeable future, no word from several prospects, no payments of accounts rendered, to speak of, and an overdraft so high, $18,000, that bank manager Mr. Miller may well decline to honour today's paychecks. At least I'm sure I'll be getting a phone call from him.
Work started to disappear from Robin. And our friends like myself would would channel work towards him and things like that, because it was just a very sad situation.
He had suffered greatly when Roy ratted, and of course it ruined him. We thought it led to his death.
I believe that he was so broken by the circumstances of what he was facing that I think his immune system couldn't resist the infection. That's my own. I'm no doctor, but I could see that he just couldn't resist the disease. You know, it was very sad. I'm very emotional talking about it.
Royal Melbourne Hospital, October the 8th, 1971. Dear Frederick, I am still in hospital, although I hope it won't be too much longer now. This has been a most damnable, unexpected and shattering thing. My biggest problem is not to get into a state of morbid depression, which I have successfully avoided, apart from brief explosions up to date. Meanwhile, the cream of the medical profession races around trying to look up my case in the books. I hope all goes well with you. Love to all the family. Robin.
He himself, I think, by the late 60s was writing articles about anti-architecture, about pop. He was seeing the world change as well. And the frustrating thing is that his early death meant that we couldn't see what he would predict next.
Clearly, if we're going to have a Boyd Foundation in a Boyd house, this was the ideal house to be in. Because being a house that Robin designed for himself, it reflected all of his design aspirations, the principles that he was working on. So this really is an exceptional house.
It's wonderful. People often ask me, what's it like coming back into the house? And there's all these strangers and they're all doing different things. And I say, it's fantastic. I mean, that's what this house should be. And Robin would have, apart from being the private person, he would have enjoyed that it was being used.
I would again attribute Boyd as a commentator and an intellectual around architecture as having partly laid the ground for quite a questioning architectural culture that's here that continues to evaluate his work, both the lessons from it and some questions for it as well.